probably gonna sit.
I can't hear anything.
No, we are waiting for
Okay.
a signal. Yes, I think we're ready right now. Thank you all for coming here tonight to join me in this, as a part of the ongoing exhibition, Women in Comics here at Foqus Foundation. The exhibit will go on until the end of October. As Allegra told you before, this exhibit started in New York, was organized by Kim Munson, and then it moved to Rome, and it's finally here in Naples for a few months. As a part of that ongoing exhibition, we have two guests tonight, Afua Richardson and Carol Tyler, and we will be chatting a little bit. I want to know something about their job, their ongoing work, their future projects, and we have a few questions that and of course, I'm very glad to hear Q&A from the audience, questions at the end of our talk. So, but let me first begin with some acknowledgement. We need to thank a lot of people for the possibility to organize this talk. So, first, Rachele Furfaro, President of Foqus, Associazione Quartieri Spagnoli, Renato Quaglia, Director of Foqus, Claudio Curcio, Director of Comicon Napoli, Allegra Nelli, that you have seen before. She is the exhibition curator for Comicon, and the U.S. mission to Italy. Represented here today by Heidi Schellinger, Management Officer of the U.S. Consulate General in Naples. And I'm gonna have her here on the stage, so I'm gonna let her talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincenzo. No, that's okay. Is it okay if I sit here with the live? I hope you can see me. Hi, everybody. My name is Heidi Schellinger. I'm the Management Officer at the U.S. Consulate General here in Naples, and I'm really excited about this opportunity to speak with you all tonight. I'm honored to represent the U.S. government as part of the Women in Comics exhibition. It is also a great pleasure to be present with so many of you in the audience after so many months, and also to connect with our guests, our American guests virtually. We look forward to a time, hopefully soon, when we can all be together in the same room safely. I would also like to express some gratitude also to Foqus, the Associazione Quartieri Spagnoli, President Rachele Furfaro, and Director Renato Quaglia for hosting us at this wonderful location. Professor Vincenzo Bavaro from the University L'Orientale for moderating the talk. And of course to the artists Carol Tyler and Afua Richardson, connected with us from the United States. Thank you all so much for this opportunity. I also want to express my appreciation to the Comicon Association for their commitment and creativity in making this event possible despite the difficulties and restrictions imposed by the pandemic and the weather, and above all for putting a spotlight on an industry in which the role of women is not yet fully recognized and appreciated. Our consulate has a long historical relationship and friendship with the city of Naples. In fact, in December, we will celebrate 225 years of diplomatic relations, and that's longer even than America's relationship with Rome. We are proud of all the connections between Americans and Italians. We continue to encourage cultural exchanges between our two countries, and we are happy to support initiatives that help promote American art and culture. This talk will address a wide range of issues, including the importance of storytelling, new trends in comics, tradition, and most importantly, the role that gender and racial identities have played and continue to play for artists in the comics industry. Overcoming gender stereotypes is a global issue that we must all work to solve. It is essential to find ways to showcase the talent and leadership skills of young women and develop new skills that will open opportunities in today's global economy. Women's empowerment is an issue at the center of the new administration's agenda. It is a commitment that was demonstrated through the president's choice for vice president, Kamala Harris, but also through the establishment of a gender policy council within the White House, a body that has the task to inspire, promote, and coordinate engagement by the government towards gender equality. As Secretary of State Antony Blinken said, when we support women, we can help foster change on a much broader scale, because it's often women doing the hard work to make that change happen. I look forward to tonight's discussion to further strengthen the conversation with younger generations who are interested in these topics. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoy and have a great night.
Thank you so much. Yep. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Heidi. Well, before I introduce the two guests, the two stars of tonight, I want to say a couple of things about the title of this talk. As you've seen, this is called Anything You Want. Anything You Want is just a line from a documentary, She Makes Comic, that was broadcast here on the opening day in the exhibition. One line, I don't remember an artist that was interviewed in the documentary. She said, well, in comics, you can do anything you want. So I like this as almost like this limitless possibilities. Not so much for the medium, comics, you can really do anything you want. And you'll see how different the things you can do with comics are. But also as a very positive attitudes for women artists, women intellectuals, women in general. The possibilities are limitless. I chose these two writers because are some of the coolest artists I could have tonight, and I'm so delighted and excited to have them here. They represent this title in some very curious way. Anything you want. You can do it. You will do it. So you will see that Afua Richardson and Carol Tyler are very different. This is almost like they give us a little bit of a sense of a range of diversity and variety of the medium and the artistic production. So let me introduce briefly some biographical notes about the two artists. Let me start with Carol Tyler. Carol Tyler is one of the most important and influential artists to come out of the alternative comics movement of the 1980s. Sometimes she is referred as a second wave of underground comics. She's known for her beautifully written and drawn autobiographical stories. Carol was born and raised in Chicago. She received a master's from Syracuse University in 1983. After some years in New York City, she moved to San Francisco and began getting her comics published in R. Crumb's Weirdo. At Comicon 1988, Tyler was awarded the Dory Seda Memorial Award for Best New Female Cartoonist. Tyler has many books. There's the graphic masterpiece, Soldier's Heart, The Campaign to Understand My World War II Veteran Father, A Daughter's Memoir from 2015. Which began as the You'll Never Know trilogy. Soldier's Heart describes the author's damaged relationship with her dad and how his untreated PTSD shaped her childhood and affected her relationship into adulthood. Soldier's Heart received the Gold Medal of Excellence from the Society of Illustrators and multiple other awards. It was named on Time Magazine Top 10 Comics of the Year list, and Rolling Stone magazine placed it on the list of top 50 graphic novels of all time. It earned 11 Eisner Awards nominations. Her brilliant The Hannah story was named on the list of the top 100 comic works of the 20th century. She has two additional solo short story collections, The Job Thing from 1993 and Late Bloomer from 2005. Her current book is called Fab Four Mania, inspired by a series of keepsake booklets Miss Tyler made when she was 13. Fab Four Mania is a first-hand account of seeing the Beatles in 1965. Next up, in 2022, the Ephemerata, Shaping the Exquisite Nature of My Grief. Professor Tyler teaches comics, graphic novels, and sequential art at the University of Cincinnati, the AAP School of Art, and is a residency artist with the Ohio Arts Council. Help me give her a welcome with a round of applause. I'm also going to say a few words about our other speaker, and then we can begin our conversation. Again, I'm very happy to improvise. Of course, we have some questions and some issues that we want to deal with, but whatever this synergy, as you probably don't know, but these two artists are excellent and exceptional in so many ways, but also they are a lot, and you will see what I mean. There's a lot going on here. Like the idea of meeting the artist behind the work, it's always a challenge and it's always exciting because you will see when we talk to them, there's so much more here that exceeds the graphic novel or the comics medium. So the title, Anything You Want, is even appropriate for their passion and their talent and what they do. So, a few words on Afua Richardson. Afua Njoki Richardson is an African indigenous American illustrator who is best known for her Eisner Award-winning work of Marvel's first all-African American female created series, Black Panther: World of Wakanda. Other works include HBO's Lovecraft Country, All-Star Batman, X-Men '92, and as a recipient of the Glyph Award and Nina Simone Award for Artistic Excellence. She's one of the few Black women to work for Marvel, DC, and Image Comics as a penciler, inker, and colorist. In addition to being an illustrator, Afua is an author, classically trained musician, singer, songwriter, voice actor, and mentor to many aspiring artists. Let me just add here that her work is an inspiration for many people around the world, and the US, of course, and especially young women. When I moved, as some of you know, I was in New Orleans as a Fulbright scholar at Tulane University. I moved into a house there, and my roommates were part of a New Orleans Mardi Gras crew that is inspired to World of Wakanda, and I know they're following us on YouTube or Facebook. They are the Women of Wakanda crew, and and they want to know, and they want to tell you, Afua, how much your work is an inspiration, is a model for self-worth, self-healing, and empowerment. So I'm very happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And to my sisters in New Orleans, Wakanda forever.
Yes, Wakanda forever. Okay, let me begin. It's just like a really easy question as a warm-up. Tell us something. Maybe I'm going to go back to Carol. Carol, tell us something about the beginning. This question is actually open to both of you. So I want to know, when did you find out, when did you discover your passion for comic or for comic art and your talent for it? Because I know that going back into childhood is always a good move to understand a person. So, Carol.
I don't have a history of growing up wanting to be a cartoonist or liking comics. I mean, I did like, they were in culture, they were in the newspapers, people. And in high school, I read them, but comics, when I was growing up in the 50s, were pretty much geared for boys. And my brother had a bunch of them under his bed, and if I went in there, he'd scream at me to get out. So comics were sort of off limits. But one of the things the reason why I came to comics was because over the years, growing up, high school and all of that, I realized I liked doing artwork. And so I went to college for that. I didn't get much feedback. My parents never got behind my ambitions. So this was all things that I kind of discovered by just like, let's try this, or yeah, I like that, I'll try that. But I had no energy behind me, no family support. So I knew I liked to doodle around with art. And in high school, that was fun. And then when I went to college, it was like, I kind of want to do art because I liked it and I was pretty good at drawing and stuff like that. But every time I would draw something or make a painting or a picture as I was going through the different stages of college, I have a master's, so it was like a long drawn out, get married, not be married, go back to college, quit, back and forth. But eventually, I noticed that I was using pictures, paintings, to tell stories about things that I liked, that I observed, interesting things that happened. And then I'd put a card next to the picture that I had made, the single panel, that would tell the story of everything that was about. Or I'd have to stand there and explain to people. And I finally said, after years of this, a decade in, it's like, well, why don't I just write the words on the picture of the story that I'm trying to tell? And just to make a long story short, in between, like, there was nobody doing this like the way I wanted to do it. So I had to kind of invent it. And in terms of like what it was I wanted to do, because I didn't have that orientation as a young person or that interest as a young person, I knew about Marvel and DC products. I knew comics. I knew characters. I knew the Harvey lineup. That would be like Little Lotta and Dot and Nancy, John Stanley, Nancy, even, and then Bush Miller in high school. I knew those characters. But how can I get there from here? It was not a dream that was possible. There was no way I thought that I could do that. So my comics making came out of trying to tell people about something that happened or something I observed. So I always had that skill of wanting to share that. I did stand-up comedy for a while, storytelling and all that. So I had the observational skill. And I finally just put it out in panels. I finally did see work by some of the underground cartoonists. And I liked how they were just, didn't matter. Put it out there. Sex, drugs, rock and roll. So this was not hero-oriented material. It was experiential. That's what I liked because that's what I was doing in my paintings.
That's wonderful. You guys, I'm not going to tell you the history of U.S. comics, but underground comics was a watershed, was a groundbreaking experiment.
Yes.
And
yes.
And she was a part of it. And they were pushing boundaries, not just. Actually, I want to ask you another little thing about this. So the underground comics is, like in the 50s, there was the Hays Code, the Comics Authority. So there was a infantilization of the medium. The bad guys were supposed to be bad. The good guys were supposed to be good. It was very simplistic. It was flat characters, no development. It was a very bizarre era. And at the same time, comics were under attack for being the seduction of the innocent, for leading young kids to bad areas because they were become criminal by reading comics. This was in the 50s. In the 60s and 70s, with the explosion of alternative comics, they changed the distribution, they changed the format, the ownership of comics. So it was really groundbreaking. But I'm asking here, because this is obviously a Women in Comics exhibit upstairs on the first floor, how really alternative was the underground movement. In terms of diversity, in terms of inclusion, did you ever experience, like, how was it to work in the alternative comic world as a woman in this, when you were there in San Francisco?
Well, remember that I'm of the age of all the underground cartoonists, but I was not in San Francisco when it was really going on, and that would be the late 60s, early 70s. I wasn't there. I met people and started to know people and started to plug into that later, a little bit after disco. And it was, you know, a lot of guys and a lot of parties, a lot of hell raising. It was bawdy. It was intense. And the women in comics in the underground were fed up to the point that there were a lot of titles that came out of that era, because you could get publishers were behind women creating comics and doing comics, and the men were too. But if you look at some of the stuff that was going on, it was pretty raunchy. So the women did raunchy stuff too, but a lot of times with their own titles, women's comics and tits and clits and magazines, pamphlets, 40 pagers, where it was all women contributors. And then I became involved with Twisted Sisters, and I did some stuff for women's Twisted Sisters. So it's not like, I mean, for a while as it began, San Francisco was a hotbed and a lot of people were there. And then, of course, I moved to California, and I got to know all of those folks. And I just submitted my stories and got involved that way. I submitted my stuff to, at that time, Weirdo, this magazine that Crumb had started. He got tired of doing the editorial, so he handed it over to his wife, Aileen Kaminsky Crumb. So as editor, when Aileen was editor, she wanted to champion women contributions. And so that's how I did that. But I also submitted stuff to women's comics, and I had stuff published there and in lots of things. So it was like the temperature changed from, it's almost like the underground guys busted the doors down with that alpha energy or something. Oh, they're gonna go in their own publishing companies. They're not gonna be work for hire. That was a big difference between Marvel and DC and the underground, is that it was all creator controlled, kept your copyright.
Wonderful.
And so that's what happened. So there is one little thing that's interesting. Even though I was in Weirdo and I did all this kind of stuff, and I started everybody work. Of course, I had a baby. I was raising a kid. That's hard. So at the same time, I was trying to get my career going. So one of the things I decided I was going to do was, for the weeklies, there were weeklies. And I thought, boy, because the money, you'd make like $50 a page. I got to tell you something. I was on a panel at a comics thing about 3 years ago. And we were laughing and talking about the good old days, me and a bunch of guys. And they were talking about those lousy page rates of $125. I said, $125? I got $50 a page. So I got paid less. I didn't know it at the time. And then when the weeklies were there, I thought, boy, you know, the weekly paper would pay you like $5 for each comic that they would publish. And I thought, if I could get into 50 weeklies, I could make a living and stay home with, you know, and be with my kid, and I wouldn't have to go look for a job. I didn't have any car. I didn't have any money. So I came up with just hard scrabble. I made a whole stack of work, and I submitted it, and they said, this is for the weeklies. They said, oh, we already have a girl cartoonist. We don't need another one. There were like 6 or 8 guys, 1 woman, and they said they didn't need another one.
Wow, talk about tokenism.
And that was in the 80s.
Wonderful, thank you. Wow, okay. Yeah, the issue of ownership, the issue of how to make a living, Carol, these are some of the most crucial issues we will keep talking about this. Afua, let's move the question to you. I know that you have well, obviously, fast forward a couple of generations, or maybe one generation, and tell us something about how was your upbringing artistically, and how did you get closer to the comic world?
I had a love of comics since I was a little girl. I actually recently caught up with a friend of mine, one of my oldest friends, who I met in kindergarten. And when you meet, your future friends in primary school for the first time, and your first time going to school, you walk around and say your name, and you shake hands, and you just say hi to people. Well, he extends his hand. He says, "Hi, my name is John." And I reply with, "I can shoot my nails out. Shink." So I think I have been enamored with these characters for a very long time. And I was a tomboy. I played sports. I was on the track team. I did a lot of things that boys did. And I was usually the only girl, and I was fine with that. But what I really appreciated about comics were the archetypes. You would see characters that had capabilities and superpowers and complex storylines, but people didn't always like them. So if you're dealing with characters like the X-Men, the X-Men were heroes. They would rescue people. They would fight these big, giant enemies that were coming to destroy the earth. But people were afraid of them. But they still had the kindness to do what was right, despite not being liked. So I thought that was something heroic and worth repeating. And I found myself defending my friends. And there are friends of mine who will remind me that one time they got robbed or mugged, or somebody took their purse and ran, and I'd run after them and get their stuff back. That's not always advisable, but it was something that I internalized as a part of my life. And so I was a musician. I started as a flute player when I was 9, and then by the time I went to high school, I went to LaGuardia for the performing arts and did an undergrad at Juilliard. And so music became my expressive language. And I taught myself art because it was something that I always loved, but I wasn't very good at. And my father is a physicist. He's a sculptor, an oil painter. He helped develop MRIs. He helped develop string theory, a very brilliant man and a polymath. He does a lot of different kinds of things, but being a Black man in the South in the 50s and 60s, the kinds of opportunities that he wanted were not available to him. So he didn't discourage me from being an artist and expressing myself, but he didn't want me to pursue art as a career because he felt that there was no place for us in it. And so I didn't listen. And I continued to make the things that I wanted, because what I noticed about art was everything that we do, everything that we buy, everything that we interact with, an artist has touched. From the graphic design on your street signs to the labels in your grocery store, somebody had to make that. And so I believe that my dad, it wasn't that he didn't believe in me. He just didn't believe in the path of art for me, and he didn't want me to starve. But as a musician, when I started going around and performing and doing gigs and having events and doing all of these different things with my music, I realized that I needed art. I needed business cards. I needed stickers. I needed posters. I needed to express to people the feeling of the kind of music that I was going to create. So art and music for me are synonymous. Like when I listen to music, I see things, like I'll see colors, I'll see different scenes. And when I'm working on my comic books, I'll play music that I've curated together for this purpose. And so now having the opportunity to do this for a living, and then going to comic conventions and speaking to young artists, I will always take time. I will always take time. I will always take time for young artists, because I understand how much it meant to me to be able to express myself through work, to be able to express myself through art, because I didn't always trust my voice. I was very shy. I was very unsure, but I was sure of what I made. And just like in classical music, practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And there is no perfect. But if I understood techniques, then I didn't have to be talented in order to make art. I just had to know what it was I wanted to say and the path in which I could go to get there. And so being able to help someone else be able to have that emotional maturity and take the chaos of the world in your mind and everything and funnel it into art, that's a service, because someone else can feel and communicate with you through your artwork, and you're not there. And you may no longer be there, and it'll outlive you if you put what is honest and true in your work. At least that's what I found, and that's what I experienced with the artist before me, with the artists that I encountered in, and the music and the visuals of creators through time, and how much it's had an impression on me. I want to contribute to that, and I want to help others be able to just do that as well, even if that's not something they want to do for a living. Just to be able to put those things together. People will often say, oh, I can't even draw a stick figure. I'm just like, we're all made of sticks. It's fine. That's a good start.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Afua. I want to know something. You guys are both, Carol and Afua, you have such diverse aesthetics and practice also. If you look at the A Soldier's Heart by Carol Tyler, she has this very experimental way of managing the page, organizing the pace. She explodes the grid. She does crazy things, and obviously that's why it's a masterpiece. But at the same time, also Afua she's doing like incredible thing as an illustrator, as a storyteller. And again, one thing that I'm fascinated by is to push the boundaries of the medium as well. I've heard in an interview that Carol says, I think of myself as a fine artist primarily. And I know that she has some work that is entirely outside of the traditional scope of comic art. She does crazy things that are fine art. There are installations. She had an exhibition in, I think, at Ohio University, and she was like, again, as an artist, an art installation in the indoor. So I want to know to what extent your current projects are somehow like a good example of pushing boundaries, not just of the medium, but also to find stories that matter. Because both of you, like, I love your work also because this is not some useless thing. These are like both your stories, the stories you choose to articulate, to create, the work you do matters. And like, again, Soldier's Heart is an investigation into trauma, her father's trauma, and to what extent trauma, when it's not articulated or dealt with, repeats itself. And it's like, these are really tough stuff, and she does it wonderfully. Visually, her visual storytelling is insane. Likewise, some of the most recent work by Afua expand issues like gender, race identity, urban conflict. I was reading Genius a few days ago by Afua Richardson, and it's almost uncomfortable in the way it pushes boundaries. I don't know. Genius is the story of like possibly in South Central LA, maybe Compton. There is this leader. She is a genius of like almost like of warfare. She decides she is the leader of a community that declare war to the LAPD. And it's intense, but it's so well thought and so visually stunning. So again, the issue of stories that matter and to what extent you guys push boundaries in your current work. I don't know who, maybe Carol wants to begin?
Well, I'm known for unflinching, looking right into the truth of the situation. When I did the story called The Hannah Story, I think it was one of the first, may have been the first, not sure, but it was one of the first stories to talk about the death of a child and the effect that it had on, in my case, my mother's life. And she didn't talk about it, which is what happens with a lot of folks that have had trauma. They don't talk about it, tuck it away until a point in their life comes when they can bring it out. And so she told me when she was in her 70s or 80s, she told me what happened to my sister. I always thought that she just, I don't know. We had heard that she had a sister, I saw her in the photograph, she died. No details, never talked about, why. And then my mom told me the real story of how when she pulled a hot pot of boiling water on her and it scalded her body. This is my sister. And my mom telling me this. So I think the thing is, when you're dealing with, in my case, I'm dealing with the people I know. And very close, my mother, my sister, my dad. These are stories involving my close ties. She said that when they went to pick her up, they bandaged her up and the nurses said, go home, she'll be fine, we'll pick her up the next day. So the next day when they went to pick her up, the lady at the front desk says, oh, we have her listed as deceased. And that's how my parents found out that their child had died. And the fact that they took her to the doctor and thought, oh, they'll help her, and then they didn't. Okay, now that's something my mom, the burden she carried, this was back in the 40s, she carried that burden her whole life, and it affected everything. So that's trauma that set into our family. There was a lot of like, not talking about things. My parents were, they met during World War II. My dad was a pipe fitter. My mom was like an executive type secretary, but gave that up to raise kids and all that. Working class people. And like I said, no expectation for any of us kids, because when you lose a child, you start to not want to bond so closely, at least back then. So it kind of left me going, I don't know where I fit into this life. And it made me quiet, and that's when I observed. So all I'm saying is, for me, like my next project is about mourning and loss, because everybody I've ever been writing about, pretty much, not everybody, a lot of the people, most of the people that have been the heart and soul of my stories for years and years, they died while I was doing Soldier's Heart. My dad, my sister, my mom, my editor, my publisher, editor-publisher, the guy next door and his son, within about a few weeks of each other. One of my friends lost a child. It just was like, I was just being inundated with funerals. And then the people who were alive in my family who were left, they left me. So I've had to deal with loss from death, loss from estrangement. And since I'm an artist, what do you do with that? You know, how do you articulate that? And so now it's coming out both as in my traditional story, I want to tell the story, but it's coming out as sculptures and three-dimensional elements and more installation work, and taking the technical challenge of taking a flat image and trying to make it bend in space. That's my current challenge. How do I make a flat comic page into something. So it's just something that's moving me, and it's bigger. Look, I have been overwhelmed with grief for the last several years. And in some ways, working with three-dimensional materials is helping me to get bigger than my grief and to try to understand it.
Thank you, Carol. This is one of the most noble function of art, probably, to elaborate strong feelings. I know you had some images, but I'm like, I think we're running out of time, actually. So, but again, these, like Carol Tyler and Afua Richardson, have a very strong social media presence, both on Instagram, on YouTube. So if you're curious, go check the materials they have online, and it's incredible. So I'm sorry that I'm going to move to Afua with the similar question to what extent your current project, actually I'm more curious about Aquarius, the Aquarius project, and to what extent it's pushing boundaries, and if you tell us what it's all about.
Sure. Aquarius, the Book of Myr, is my first creator-owned in my 16 years of doing comics. And it's a modern retelling of mermaid myths and legends from all over the world. And why I chose mermaids and flood myths is because almost every culture has one. There's almost, geographically, sometimes there just isn't, but there's always a strange a story, a statue, a relief, and even in Naples, there are these stories of mermaids and sirens and these half aquatic creatures that are in various cultures, from Japan and the Ningyo and the Kappa to the Micmac and the Sabawa Ilnu, or Mishipishu of the Great Lakes, La Sirène, La Baleine of Haiti. And it kind of started with a question for me. Are sirens and mermaids just European? And it's okay if they are. The chupacabra is Latino, and that's fine. But I started looking, and there was Yemoja and Oshun and Mamiwata and the Njuzu of Zimbabwe. And I'm like, man, I've never heard these stories before. They're fascinating. And I think what really brought it all together for me was a dream that I had about my great-grandfather. My mother is a clinical psychopath. She's it was very difficult to have any kind of peace at home, and we were all just kind of very silently enduring her episodes. And there was a lot of violence, there was a lot of yelling, there was a lot of things being thrown, and it was very hard to narrow my mind or even talk about it. There was always chaos, and music and art were places that I could put my focus and say, there has to be something beautiful in the world, because someone made this, and they could not have made it in this. But I had a dream about my great-grandfather when I was 3 years old. And I love my great-grandfather. I don't know how I remember him, but it's because he passed away when I was 1, but I remembered his face. And in the dream, I see him, but, something horrible happens, and it's terrifying to me. And it was so scary that in real life, I woke up and fell out of bed and landed on a pencil and got a pencil jammed right through my hand, and I still have the lead in it. So I had the dream over and over again. And the dream itself was in a room where every wall was a window. And when I was 21, I got a job at Windows on the World, which is at the top floor of the World Trade Center, in April of 2001. And it looked just like the room that I saw my great-grandfather in the dream. And so I got nervous, and I spilled water on this really important politician, and I got fired from the job. Wow. But if I didn't have that dream, I would not have been fired, and I would have been working the morning shift on the day of September 11th when the towers went down in New York City. And so one thing that I notice about a lot of these legends is that these mermaids are not just creatures that are found in caves and on the sides of rocks and singing, sailors to their death. Sometimes they're creatures that exist in dreams that make promises to you. And others are helpful, some are not so helpful. And so one of the stories that I heard of the Sabawa Ilnu, or the halfway person in Nova Scotia with the Mi'kmaq Nation, is that sometimes these creatures will come up from the water, from the lakes, and they'll rock your boat and they'll mess with you a little bit, and you have to give them tobacco or a knife and they'll leave you alone. But if you disrespect them, they'll cause a storm, they'll cause nightmares, they don't like if you don't show them their proper respect. And so one of the stories that I'm putting in Aquarius is about my great-grandfather when he's a young man, and he encounters one of these creatures, and they're injured, and so he takes care of them and brings them back to the ocean. And when he's in his final hours, the thing tries to save him, but he doesn't get there in time. And so he says to him, I have followed you through time, through the era of you, and I've moved you out of the way when things were coming. If you felt that little wet handprint on your back, that was me following through and thanking you for saving my life. But I was not able to repay the favor this time. But I'll show you the streams of all of your kin, and if there's a river you want me to change, I'll deliver that message in a dream. And when I look at a lot of stories, especially of indigenous cultures or various cultures that may not have as much documentation, written documentation, because they are oral traditions, a lot of these stories get lost if the next generation doesn't think that they're important. And to me, in the end, we're going to be stories anyway. I want to carry on my story, my family's story, and the stories that are sacred to nations everywhere, because we all are born in salt water, and we're going to end up as salt in the end. So I want to make stories about the things that unite us, even though we're all very, very different. So this story is my heart on the page. And I'm also making music for it. This is the first project that I'll be making. I'll be singing and performing music that's engineered for each issue. There'll be a particular scene that has music embedded in it. And I've been working with some really fantastic musicians and kind of marrying those two disciplines of mine together into one. So I'm really excited about just giving people a different experience with storytelling. I know there are always soundtracks for comics, or there are soundtracks for different things, but I don't know if there have been many comic book artists who've made the music and are willing to perform it. And it's also a part of the story. It's not just like, here's a song, that's great. Yep. It is a story in and of itself. And so I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll move on. But yeah, that's what I'm working on now.
Thank you. There is something recurring in both of your work, both recently and the work you've been doing. It's always like this idea of centering on stories that matter to us, going into, I think in one interview you said, I was starting to work on Aquarius because I realized that much of the work I've done wasn't about me. So this idea of looking at to center yourself, which is what also Carol is doing in her work. The idea of going deep and investigating your own subjectivity to center yourself. Okay, I have a million other questions, and I wanted to see more work by Carol, and I wanted to hear Afua sing, but I'm going to stop right now. I think we're running out of time. I want to know if there is any question from the audience. Because if you have any question, I'll gladly. Here they tell me, from the organizer tell me that you should come over here so that they can see you. So we have one question so far. Please, anyone else? Okay. Yep.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. So my question started. Sorry about
none
that.
of you.
I didn't know
No, that's okay.
okay.
I
Hello.
hear you.
Hi. So my
I can't
question
hear
was
you,
kind of
but
about
I can hear you, so go ahead.
What? Okay. Was kind of about the title of this talk. I wrote a question. The title of the talk is Anything You Want, but does the publishing industry really let you do anything you want? Was your creativity ever restricted on a topic that you as a woman wanted to express through your work? And how do you compromise between needing to make a living out of this job and your values, especially when you're an emerging artist and you kind of depend on your publisher?
Is the question for both of them?
Yes, for both of them.
Wow, that's okay. So the question was for both of you. Like, is that to like? Okay, you got the question.
There's a lot to cover, but understanding what your job is as an artist is important. You know, you're going to have your style and the things that are important to you and the things that you like to make. Those things that you put in your portfolio that you put forward, be sure that it's something that you would like to be hired to do. And then it doesn't necessarily mean you have to hide other work that you don't want to be hired to do, but what people see of you, that's what they assume you like to do. So whatever portfolio piece you put forward and whatever you put on social media and things like that, understand that what that registers as is, this is my thing, and so I can be hired to do this. And so a lot of times clients won't necessarily know what they want, but they want your look for their project. And so doing discovery and talking to the client and understanding, okay, they have an idea that I need to meet with what it is that I do. And a lot of times there will be a compromise because it's not your vision that you're trying to execute, it's theirs. And if you're reading a script or something along those lines, you have to try to sort of dig into what it is that you're saying and try to communicate as effectively as possible. And then, you know, in the beginning, when you're putting your artwork out there and you're getting gigs and things like that, you're not going to be able to charge as much as you need to live in the beginning, because of the experience that you have getting started. And that's okay. You know, sometimes it's gradual. I had to work a lot of different jobs, and I would just take my lunch breaks and work on a computer at my office and, you know, try to not get crumbs on the keyboard. But I would work at my day jobs on comics, and I did that until I was able to just do comics full time, and it made more sense to do that. But I had to invest. I had to sort of steal hours back because it wasn't going to just happen overnight. And then I went to San Diego Comicon and met Mark Silvestri and handed him some of my work. And then 6 months later, they were like, "Hey, we see that you've been constantly working and constantly doing, you know, a lot of work that we think is ready. You know, would you do this book?" And Genius was the first cover to cover book that I had, and I had no idea what I was doing. But when the opportunity strikes, you want to be ready. So know how long it takes for you to do something. Give yourself, even your small projects, deadlines, because if you're building a house, you need to be able to tell your client how long it takes for you to build that house. You know, and there are going to be things that happen. There are going to be changes, you know, but for you personally, okay, it takes me 1 week to do a cover. It takes me 4 days. It takes me 3 hours, whatever that time is, double it. Because there's going to be, you know, just conversation back and forth. And what you're doing essentially is buying back your time. You're going to be able to, you know, you'll get these clients and you'll get these jobs and you'll do things that you will be deciding whether or not you want to do the things. But then you'll be able to get to the point where you can say, no, I don't want to do that. That's not what I want to do. And you'll be buying back your time. You would have had so much work that is published that people will trust you with their time and their money. And so that's essentially what we're doing as working artists. We're buying back our time. So I'll leave it at that and let
Thank you.
Carol.
Carol, do you have anything to add?
I don't know what to say. I come from such a different place. It's never been lucrative for me. I'm telling fantastic stories, but the difference is, like, I don't know. I've never understood why my stories have never jumped into mainstream media. They're there. I write them. I live them. I draw them. I do them in a good, timely fashion. I've been around a long time. I think there's just certain things you have to look at the market. Right now, the YA market, young adult, is hot. And so I'm talking about death and dying. That's not young adult, period.
Yep.
But at the same time, I think you got to have an agent. I've never had an agent. I publish whatever I want. Nobody's ever said no to me. But I also feel like I have a responsibility because it's my ass hanging out there. It's my responsibility. What do I want my reputation to be? You know, do I want to be known for this or this or this? And so what I deliver is a sound story with emotional impact, whatever the topic is. There's a lot to look at visually. I've asked, why don't you translate this into Italian or German or whatever my books? It's because I was told, because you do your own hand lettering. Everything I do is by hand. I don't use a computer. I use custom mixed inks. I use pen and ink. I draw with a pencil. And so it's not because, I'm against the computer. I'm not against technology. It's just,
That's what
you want to write something, you pick up a pen or a pencil. You want to ink it, you use ink. I'm very oriented towards real materials. And so, I don't know, for me, it was a confluence of, like I said, the guy said, we have a girl cartoonist, or, you know, women had a little bit more difficult, or in my case, I had to do it all while having a kid hanging off my boob, literally. And and then of course I was in a marriage situation that was not like, I always had to pull the weight. So that meant having a job. And it's so amazing to listen to Afua, who has had such success and such wonderment, you know, in what you do. And I love listening to that. And it's amazing because there's so many things that are similar. I also have music I make up in my head and then I create it. And when I hand it to my publisher, this music goes with this, they just go. So, you know, I have offered everything. And I don't know why. It's just, it's a totally different market. The kind of I'm stuck in this indie niche. And then if you go to Amazon, they've got the most goofy categories for my label for my books. And then where's the publicist? Where's the this? Where's the that? Who's helping Team Tyler? I'm Team Tyler. That's it.
That's
so
it.
what
That's
you
right.
see, what I have to offer is all I have to, as far as I can get. If you can get an agent that can help you, if you can try to crack the market, if you can go to these shows, go to all those conventions, go talk to people, show up at parties, use whatever connections you have, be brilliant, do it cheap. There's no right answer.
Yeah, everybody's path is so different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
And I feel like also like the market, the comics market has been transformed in the past few decades. Like again,
Definitely.
a lot of illustrators work for media, for Netflix series, for HBO series, like some of us.
Yes.
And like so, it's the market is exploded. You can do like a young artist
Anything
today.
you want.
Yeah, exactly. A young artist today
Yeah.
has a wider net of possibilities, I think, wider range of possibilities. But anyway,
Yeah.
thank
I
you so
will
much.
say this.
Yeah.
Let me say this. There are a lot of people who go to cartoon colleges and they get trained into comics and they're in comics and they're with it. And there's a real strategy on wanting to get those, when I see young cartoonists, it's like, aren't you exhausted the way that you have to work social media? I never had that burden, but they're like drawing, they're posting the drawing, they're selling the drawing, they're making the connection, they're hashtagging everything. And it takes as much energy to do all of that stuff as to just make the material.
Yeah, you have to be your own business.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I find that exhausting.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in that. I want to just get in there and make and tell and create and listen and think and then try to enjoy the fact that by some weird thing living on a shoestring, I'm able to be okay.
Yeah, the issue of social media management is a big issue for a lot of categories that a few years ago they didn't have to worry about that. But like, yeah, I know, like half of us should get a social media manager for our job, even if our job is entirely unrelated. Anyway, other questions from the audience? Yes. Thank you.
Hi, nice to virtually meet you, both of you. I have a question for both of you, whoever wants to respond. If you have one advice for young artists, or even like any artist that's trying to start in the comics industry, and especially, for example, in finding your own style and how to move your first steps. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
While I answer this question, I'm going to share my screen because I said I would.
Who wants to begin?
Okay. I'll start on that one. Okay, for comic book artists that are starting out, understanding the business of comics is really important. The style honestly comes last, because technique and the choices that you make as an artist, that's something that, you look at other people and you think, oh my gosh, I want these things. I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to do this. But the skill level that I'm at right now is where I am, and I can't do those things right now. I'm not as good as they are. And honestly, it's knowing what it is that you want in your work and understand, like finding the right teachers that help you get there. I mean, there's so many things online that can help you with particular types of technique, perspective, anatomy, composition, and all of the things that contribute to making a comic, because you're not just drawing a single figure, you're telling a story, you're using shape language to communicate with people, and the smaller the panel, the quicker the movement. So start with something small, 3 pages. I know sometimes people who are interested in doing comics have these giant epic sagas, and they have all these characters, and they have a whole world, and they have character Bibles, and they don't know where to start. Start with 3 pages. 3 panels, even 1 page, 1 single page, where while you're designing your character, you're considering their silhouette. A lot of the characters that you can really remember and recognize, they have very powerful silhouettes. You know what Batman looks like just from his silhouette. Bart Simpson, Superman, Wonder Woman. You know exactly who these characters are just from their outline. So just work in blobs and have something happen in those 3 panels. Tell a very, very short story, because that's what you're doing with every comic page. By the time you get to that corner, you want them to turn the page. You're making a miniature cliffhanger from one side of the page to the next. And in that single page, you are either telling your reader something about the character's personality, or you're moving the story forward. And if what you're showing doesn't do that, then cut it, because it's just kind of, conversation that doesn't actually inform your audience. So start with something small and then expand it. Expand it to 2 pages, expand it to 3. find a place where you can post and publish it. Webtoons or Instagram or Tumblr. Find communities, find online communities, Facebook groups, Discords, Twitch. Find the places where you want to be and find those people who are doing what you want to do. Hi, Persephone. My kitty Persephone has joined us. It's her time to be petted, I guess. It's so hard to know where to start. So just start. You don't have to have this big company tell you that it's okay for you to tell your stories. Tell your stories. Start small, very small, and then expand.
Thank you, Afua.
Here's what I'd like to say.
Yep.
Am I on? Am I there?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Wait, no. Maybe.
Hello?
Yeah. I can see you in a like. No, I think you're fine. Probably Afua needs to unshare her monitor. Yes.
Okay. So the question, the first thing that stuck out at me from the questioner, hello questioner, was a good question. But you said, how do I get started in the comics industry? Remove the word industry and just do comics. You got to find your voice and you have to speak it. And you have to figure out what marks, what pacing, how does it work to tell your story? What do you observe? What needs to be in there? So a lot of the problem that I find when I teach my students is they come to class with this idea of what comics is. And it's almost like I have to help them dismantle that and get to, what are you interested in? What themes sing to your heart? And how would you articulate a certain vibe or emotion or line of thinking? So I strike people to find their original voice. I say, take your hands and open your mouth like this and reach your arm in there, go down into your gut and pull out that which is real and true to you. And don't give me a rehash of everything I've already seen out there. Find the new thing that only you can do. The industry and all that comes later, you know. You may find out that I want to do a certain type of comics, but you don't have it in you. Or I get a kick out of people who, like my age, they're retiring now. They're going to start a gigantic graphic novel about their whatever it is. And I say, don't do it. It is so hard to do this work. It's not just sit down and dash off a story. It's very difficult to do a really, really, really solid, long-form comic. I started out by doing one-pagers for a weirdo. 1-pagers, 2-pagers, 3-pagers, however many pages they need to fill up the issue. And I would figure out how to modify what I needed to say to fit that format. Because remember, in comics, it ends at the last page. You don't have it to be continued, really, you shouldn't. So any art that I've ever seen, any comics I've ever read that are groundbreaking, that are interesting, that I love, the kind of stuff I go for, it's got to do with the self-expressing.
Thank you so much. Wow. Yes. Let me look at the organizer. Do we have time? We don't have time for no more questions. Nothing.
Come on, one more.
Okay. Well, like, closing on this issue of find the truth. It's so powerful, and I feel like you guys are both doing a great job about that. And you can feel it when you read your work. When something it matters, which I said at the beginning. Something it's about the truth of the story. The storytelling is truthful and it matters, and that's the bomb. That's what matters. That's an incredible work of art. So I feel like this is probably the very big difference when you're working on your truth. It obviously this is what matters. Okay, I'm gonna close this conversation. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much, Carol and Afua. It's been a honor, really, for me to have you here tonight. And hopefully we'll meet again on more medias. Thank you.
I'm going for my life coach. I need a comics coach at this point. I need her.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
need you to get behind me, man.
Yes,
Exactly.
ma'am.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vincenzo. You rock.
You guys
Okay.
are amazing.
Wow.
Should we close this?
Is that it? Turn this off now? We done?
I think so.
Is that it? Turn it off?
Yes. I think they are.
How do we do that? How do you do that?
Over on the right side, there's a red button that
Leave,
says leave.
leave,
Yes,
hit
ma'am.
that.
Okay.
Got it, thank you. Wait, I can't get. Bye-bye, sweetheart. I love you.